The blood moon hung over Manhattan like a warning, and Gideon Salvatore knew before the vision struck that tonight would change everything. He was standing in the council chamber beneath the Metropolitan Museum, surrounded by the oldest vampires in North America, when the world tilted and the scent hit him like a blow to the chest. Honeysuckle and something uniquely human, achingly mortal, impossibly perfect. His vision blurred, the chamber disappeared, and suddenly he saw her, a young woman with dark curls and eyes the color of autumn leaves, laughing at something someone said, completely unaware that she'd just become the most dangerous person in the supernatural world. The vision released him as violently as it had seized him, and Gideon stumbled back against the obsidian table, his hands gripping the edge hard enough to crack the stone. Every vampire in the room had gone silent, their ancient eyes fixed on him with expressions ranging from shock to horror. "My lord?" Constantine, his second in command for 3 centuries, moved toward him with unusual caution. "What did you see?" Gideon couldn't speak. His entire body was rigid with the certainty of what had just happened, with the impossible reality that after 1,000 years of existence, after centuries of ruling the Eastern kingdoms with absolute authority, fate had finally chosen his mate. And she was human. "Out," he managed, his voice barely recognizable. "Everyone out. Now." They obeyed without question, though he could feel their confusion, their concern, their fear. Good. They should be afraid, because what he was about to do would either save them all or destroy everything their kind had built over millennia. When the last vampire had vanished through the chamber doors, Gideon allowed himself to collapse into his chair, his head in his hands. The mate bond was undeniable, an ancient magic even older than vampires themselves, designed by whatever cruel gods had created their species to ensure they found their perfect other half. Once triggered, it was absolute, irrevocable. And according to every law he'd helped write, every code he'd sworn to uphold, fated mates had to both be immortal, had to both be vampire. A human mate was impossible by definition because the bond only formed between 2 beings of immense supernatural power. Except it had happened anyway. And now, Gideon Salvatore, king of the Eastern Kingdoms and lord of the Night Council, was bound by fate to a mortal woman whose name he didn't even know. He had to find her. The need was already clawing at his chest, making his hands shake with the urge to track that scent across the city until he found her. But first, he needed information. He needed to understand how this had happened, what it meant, and how he was going to keep her alive when every vampire law stated that humans who learned of their existence had to die. Gideon pulled out his phone, an amusing concession to the modern age that some of the older vampires still refused to accept, and called the one person who might have answers. Serafina. "My king." The ancient seer's voice was warm, unsurprised. "You felt it then." "How long have you known?" He kept his voice level, though rage simmered beneath the surface. Serafina had been the Night Council's oracle for over 2,000 years. If she'd seen this coming and hadn't warned him, 3 days, she admitted. "And before you threatened me, know that I couldn't tell you. The vision was bound by old magic, the kind that predates our courts. I could only wait for fate to run its course." Gideon forced himself to breathe, though his kind didn't technically need to. "Tell me what you know." "Her name is Rosalie Vega. She's 24, works as a trauma surgeon at Mount Sinai. She has no idea our world exists, no supernatural heritage that I can detect, and yet the bond has claimed her as yours with a strength I've never witnessed before." Serafina paused. "Gideon, this isn't a mistake. This is prophecy." "That's impossible. Humans can't form mate bonds with vampires?" "Yes, that's what we've always believed. But perhaps we've been wrong. Or perhaps she's special in ways we don't yet understand." Another pause. Heavier this time. "You know what you have to do. The law states the law was written before this possibility existed. You're the king, Gideon. You don't just enforce the law. You are the law. And right now, you have a choice. Follow rules written 1,000 years ago by vampires who never imagined this situation, or protect your mate and let the consequences come." He ended the call without responding, because they both knew there was no choice at all. The mate bond wasn't something you could ignore or deny. It was woven into the fabric of a vampire's soul, and rejecting it meant madness, death, or worse. Gideon stood, straightened his jacket, and walked out of the council chamber with purpose. He needed to see her, to confirm what every instinct was screaming, and then he would figure out how to keep the woman fate had chosen for him alive in a world that would demand her death. Mount Sinai Hospital was a chaos of fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells when Gideon arrived near midnight. He moved through the corridors like a shadow, using the mental compulsion that came naturally to his kind to ensure no one really noticed his presence. The blood scent hit him on the third floor, not hers, but enough injured humanity to make his fangs ache in his jaw. Then he caught it again. Honeysuckle and warmth and something indefinably her, and his feet were moving before his mind could catch up. He followed the scent around a corner and stopped dead. She was standing at a nurse's station, still in surgical scrubs, dark curls escaping from a messy bun, exhaustion written in every line of her body. Beautiful didn't begin to cover it. She was radiant even in her weariness, her brown skin glowing under the harsh lights, her amber eyes focused on a chart with an intensity that spoke of dedication and strength. Rosalie Vega, his mate, his impossible human perfect mate. As if feeling his gaze, she looked up, and their eyes met across the corridor. The world stopped. Gideon watched her pupils dilate, watched confusion flicker across her face, followed by something that looked like recognition, though that should have been impossible. The mate bond was supernatural. Humans weren't supposed to feel it the way vampires did. But she was feeling something, because she'd gone very still, her hand frozen on the chart, her lips slightly parted. He should leave. Should disappear before she could ask questions, before the pull between them became any stronger. Instead, Gideon found himself walking toward her, drawn by a force older than his considerable willpower. "Hi," Rosalie said, and her voice was everything soft and strong and musical, in a way that made his dead heart ache. "I'm sorry. Visiting hours are over. Are you looking for a patient?" He should lie. Should compel her to forget she'd ever seen him and leave before this became more complicated. "No," Gideon said instead, and watched her shiver at the sound of his voice. "I was looking for you, Rosalie." Her eyes widened. "How do you know my name? Have we met?" "Not exactly." He stepped closer, hyper-aware of how fragile she was, how easily he could hurt her without meaning to. "But I know you, and I think, somewhere deep down, you know me too." She should have been afraid, should have called security or backed away or done any of the sensible things a woman alone at night should do when a strange man approached her. Instead, Rosalie tilted her head, studying him with those intelligent amber eyes, and said, "You're going to think I'm crazy, but I've been dreaming about you." Every protective instinct in Gideon's body roared to life. "What kind of dreams?" "Strange ones, beautiful ones." She frowned as if trying to recall details that slipped away like smoke. "You're always trying to tell me something, but I can't hear the words. And you look," she gestured vaguely at him. "Well, exactly like you look now, actually. White hair, pale skin, gray eyes, like something out of a Gothic painting." The mate bond was manifesting in her subconscious, trying to bridge the gap between mortal and immortal. Serafina had been right, this was unprecedented. "Rosalie," he said carefully, "what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible, but I need you to trust me, just for a moment. Can you do that?" She should have said no. Any rational person would have, but something in her expression softened and she nodded slowly. "I don't know why, but yes, I trust you." Those words nearly broke him. "Is there somewhere private we can talk? Somewhere away from cameras and other people?" Rosalie hesitated for only a second before gesturing down the hall. "There's an empty consultation room, but I need to be back in 10 minutes. We're short-staffed tonight." He followed her into a small, sterile room with a desk and 2 chairs and waited until she'd closed the door before speaking. "My name is Gideon Salvatore. I'm over 1,000 years old. I'm the king of the vampire territories from Maine to Virginia, and as of approximately 2 hours ago, you became the most important person in my world." Rosalie stared at him. Then, to his surprise, she laughed not hysterically, but with genuine amusement. Okay, I'll bite. Vampire King. That's a new pickup line. I'm not joking. Gideon let some of his true nature show, let his eyes shift to the predatory red that marked him as an ancient, let his fangs extend just enough to be visible. And I wish I were, because what I'm about to ask of you is more than any human should have to bear. The laughter died in her throat. Rosalie backed up a step, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes going wide with shock, but not fear, not yet. Just stunned disbelief. That's not possible. Vampires aren't real. We're very real, and we've lived alongside humanity for thousands of years. We have laws, territories, councils, and one of our most fundamental laws is that humans who learn of our existence must either be turned or killed to protect the secret that keeps both our species safe. Now fear entered her eyes, and Gideon hated himself for putting it there. Are you threatening me? No. He moved slowly, carefully, until he was close enough that she could feel the unnatural cold that radiated from his undead body. I'm telling you that you're in danger, and I'm the only thing standing between you and that danger, because fate has decided we're meant for each other. You're my mate, Rosalie, my fated mate, and I will burn down every law and tradition my kind has ever known before I let anyone hurt you. She was breathing hard now, her heart racing in a way that made his fangs ache with hunger. But she didn't run. Instead, she looked up at him with those remarkable amber eyes and said, "Prove it. Not the vampire part, I believe that now, unfortunately. Prove that I'm your mate. Prove that this isn't just some elaborate threat." Gideon reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and took her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, electricity sparked between them, so powerful that Rosalie gasped and he felt his control waver. The mate bond surged to life, visible even to human eyes as golden light that wrapped around their joined hands like tangible magic. "Oh my God," Rosalie whispered, staring at the light. "What is that?" "That's fate," Gideon said roughly. "That's the universe telling us we belong together. I've lived for over a millennium, Rosalie, and I've never felt anything like this. Most vampires never do. The mate bond is rare, precious, and absolute. And it's chosen you." She looked up at him, and he could see her brilliant mind working through the implications, the impossibilities, the danger. "But I'm human. You said, I know what I said. This shouldn't be possible. But it is. And now we have to deal with the consequences." He squeezed her hand gently. "The Night Council will demand answers. Some will call for your death or your forced turning. Others will question my fitness to rule if I refuse to enforce the law, but I don't care about any of that. I only care about keeping you safe." "You don't even know me," Rosalie protested, but her hand was still in his, still surrounded by that golden light. "I know you're a surgeon, which means you're brilliant and dedicated and strong enough to hold people's lives in your hands. I know you dreamed about me, which means the bond has been calling to you even before it fully manifested. I know you didn't run when I told you what I am, which means you're either very brave or very foolish." His lips twitched. "Possibly both," she laughed again, shakier this time. "Definitely both. This is insane. This morning my biggest problem was whether I'd have time to eat lunch between surgeries. And now I'm standing here holding hands with a vampire king who thinks I'm his soulmate. I don't think. I know." Gideon reluctantly released her hand and the golden light faded. "But I'm not going to force anything on you, Rosalie. You have a choice here. You can come with me tonight. Let me protect you while I figure out how to handle the council. Or you can walk away, and I'll use every resource I have to ensure you're safe from a distance. Either way, you're mine to protect now. That's not negotiable." She wrapped her arms around herself, and Gideon ached to pull her close, to offer the comfort his instincts demanded he provide. But he held himself back, waiting for her decision. "If I come with you," Rosalie said slowly, "where would we go?" "I have a residence in the city, a penthouse in a building I own. You'd be safe there, and we'd have time to talk, to figure this out. I'd also need to formally announce your existence to the council soon, before they hear about it through other channels. And if I refuse, then I'll assign guards to watch over you without your knowledge, and I'll still go to war with my own council to keep you alive. The only difference is you'd be alone in your apartment instead of somewhere I can ensure your safety." Rosalie studied him for a long moment, and Gideon forced himself to remain still under that intelligent gaze. Finally, she sighed. I should be terrified. I should be calling security and having you committed. But I'm not, and that scares me more than anything else. The mate bond, he said gently. It's designed to help two souls recognize each other. You're not being compelled or controlled. I would never do that to you. You're just feeling what I'm feeling. Recognition, connection, the certainty that we're meant for each other. This is completely crazy. But she was already reaching for her bag, already making the decision he could see forming in her eyes. I need to tell the charge nurse I'm leaving, and I need to go home first to pack some things, and I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens with your council or your laws or any of this supernatural politics, you'll be honest with me. No lies, no compulsion, no treating me like I'm too fragile to handle the truth. If I'm really your mate, then I need to be your equal in this. Not some protected pet. Gideon felt something warm and unfamiliar bloom in his chest. Pride, he realized. Pride in his mate's strength and courage. I promise. Partners, not possession. Though I should warn you, the protective instincts are going to be difficult to fight. It's built into what I am. I'm a surgeon, Rosalie said dryly. I'm used to dealing with overprotective people who think they know better. I can handle a possessive vampire king. She headed for the door, then paused. One more thing. If we're doing this, if I'm trusting you with my life, I need to know you'll respect my choices, including the choice of whether or not I want to become a vampire. The thought of her turning, of keeping her forever, was intoxicating, but the thought of forcing that choice on her was abhorrent. You have my word. That decision, if it ever comes, will be entirely yours. She nodded, satisfied, and opened the door. Give me 20 minutes. Wait in the lobby, try not to bite anyone, and I'll meet you there. Despite everything, Gideon found himself smiling as she walked away. His mate was going to be a handful, and he couldn't wait. The penthouse was exactly what Rosalie had expected, obscenely luxurious, decorated in shades of black and silver and deep crimson, with floor-to-ceiling windows that probably had UV protective film. What she hadn't expected was the wall of books in the library, thousands of volumes in dozens of languages, or the modern kitchen that looked recently renovated. You cook? She asked, setting her overnight bag down. Gideon shook his head. No, but I have staff who do, and I enjoy the aesthetic. I'll have food brought up for you. You must be hungry. Now that he mentioned it, she was starving. Rosalie had worked a 12-hour shift before her world had turned upside down. Thank you. And thank you for letting me go home first, even though you looked like it physically pained you to let me out of your sight. It did, he admitted. The mate bond is strongest in the first few days after manifestation. Every instinct I have is screaming at me to keep you close, to eliminate any possible threats. I'm sorry if that makes you uncomfortable. It should, Rosalie said honestly, sinking into a ridiculously comfortable leather couch. But it doesn't, not really. I keep feeling this pull toward you, like gravity. It's disorienting. Gideon sat across from her, maintaining a respectful distance even though she could see the tension in his body. He really did look like something out of a painting, aristocratic features, high cheekbones, full lips that would have looked feminine on anyone less commanding. His white hair fell to his shoulders in a way that should have looked theatrical, but instead seemed regal, and those gray eyes were almost hypnotic in their intensity. Tell me about yourself, she said. Not the king part, the person part. Who were you before you became this? He looked surprised by the question. That was a very long time ago. I barely remember being human. Try. Gideon was quiet for a moment, and Rosalie wondered if he would refuse. Then he said, I was born in Eastern Europe, in a region that no longer exists under the same name. My father was a minor lord, and I was the youngest of 3 sons, which meant I had few prospects. I was reckless and angry and convinced I was invincible. His lips curved in a bitter smile. Then I met a woman at a festival who promised me eternal life, and I was foolish enough to believe it would be glorious. Your sire? Yes, Tatiana was ancient even then, and she turned me on a whim because she was bored. She taught me what I needed to survive, then abandoned me to figure out the rest on my own. He shrugged. I was angry about that for decades. Now I'm grateful. It forced me to become strong, to learn the politics of vampire society, to rise through the ranks until I was powerful enough that no one could hurt me again. Rosalie heard the pain beneath the words, the loneliness of centuries spent building walls to protect himself. Is she still alive, your sire? No, she was killed in the territorial wars about 500 years ago. I felt her death through the sire bond, but I didn't grieve. We hadn't spoken in centuries. I'm sorry. Don't be. That's the nature of vampire relationships. We live too long, change too much. Very few bonds last more than a century or two. He leaned forward. Except the mate bond. That's forever, or so the legends say. I never thought I'd find mine. The intensity in his gaze made Rosalie's breath catch. What happens now, with your council? I need to call a formal session and announce your existence. They'll have questions, concerns. Some will oppose the match because you're human, others because they'll see it as weakness on my part. But I've ruled the Eastern Kingdoms for 300 years, and I didn't get there by backing down. His eyes flashed red for a moment. They'll accept you, or they'll face the consequences. You can't go to war with your own people over me, Rosalie protested. There has to be another way. If there is, we'll find it. But make no mistake, I won't let anyone harm you, not even if it means civil war. A knock at the door interrupted them, and Gideon rose to accept a tray from someone Rosalie didn't see. He set it in front of her, and she realized it was perfectly prepared food, still steaming hot, pasta with vegetables, fresh bread, water, and coffee. How did you know what I'd like? She asked, picking up a fork. I called ahead and asked for something nutritious that could be prepared quickly. Was I wrong? Rosalie took a bite and nearly moaned. She hadn't realized how hungry she was. No, it's perfect. Thank you. She ate while Gideon watched, and the attention should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. He wasn't staring at her like prey, he was looking at her like she was precious, like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking for centuries. When she finished, Rosalie set the plate aside and said, Tell me about vampire politics. If I'm going to survive in your world, I need to understand how it works. So Gideon explained. He told her about the territories, about how North America was divided among several vampire kings who answered to a high council in Europe. He explained the laws about secrecy, about how revealing their existence to humans was punishable by death for both the vampire and the human involved. He described the elaborate hierarchy, the ancient families, the power struggles that played out over decades. It sounds exhausting, Rosalie said when he finished. It is, but it's also necessary. Without structure, without law, we'd be little better than the monsters humans believe we are. Are there good vampires? She asked. Ones who don't kill humans, who try to coexist peacefully. Many, actually. We have synthetic blood now, blood banks we can access, willing donors. Most modern vampires view killing as wasteful and dangerous, but there are still traditionalists who believe in the old ways, who think humans are nothing more than food. He met her eyes. Those are the ones you'll need to watch out for. Rosalie processed this, trying to fit it into her understanding of the world. A few hours ago, she'd been a surgeon with a normal life. Now she was apparently the mate of a vampire king and caught up in immortal politics. When is this council session happening? Tomorrow night. I've already sent word that it's mandatory attendance. Gideon stood and offered her his hand. Come, you should rest. I've prepared a bedroom for you and you'll be safe here, I promise. She took his hand, and again that golden light sparked between them, warm and reassuring. Gideon led her down a hallway to a beautiful bedroom, decorated in soft blues and silvers, with a massive bed and an adjoining bathroom. I'm across the hall if you need anything, he said. The windows are reinforced and spelled against intruders. No one can enter this penthouse without my permission. Rosalie turned to face him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. Spelled? Vampires can do magic? Some can. I have witches in my employ who handle protective wards. He reached out slowly and tucked a curl behind her ear, and Rosalie shivered at the touch. Sleep, Rosalie. Tomorrow's going to be difficult. Will you really go against your entire council for me? She whispered, without hesitation. His hand cupped her cheek, cold but gentle. You're mine now, mine to protect, mine to cherish, and I take care of what's mine. The possessiveness should have bothered her. Instead, Rosalie found herself leaning into his touch, craving more. This is crazy. Yes, Gideon agreed, but sometimes the best things are. He left before she could respond, closing the door softly behind him. Rosalie stood there for a moment, trying to process everything that had happened, then gave up and collapsed onto the bed. She'd figure it out in the morning, if she survived that long. The council chamber was filled with vampires when Rosalie entered the next evening, and the weight of their attention nearly drove her to her knees. Gideon had prepared her as best he could, had explained who the major players were and what to expect, but nothing could have truly readied her for the reality of dozens of ancient predators, all focused on her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. Gideon's hand was firm on the small of her back, a constant reminder that she wasn't alone. He'd dressed her in a black gown that somehow managed to be both elegant and armored, and she wore her hair down at his request. "Show them you're strong," he'd said. "Show them you're worthy of being my mate." Now, standing in front of these creatures who could kill her with barely a thought, Rosalie lifted her chin and met their stares without flinching. "You called us here on urgent business, my king," said a tall vampire woman with silver hair and cruel eyes. "I assume this human is the reason?" "Lady Morgana," Gideon said coldly, "you will address Rosalie Vega with the respect due to my mate, or you will leave this chamber. Am I clear?" Shocked silence. Then murmurs rose like a wave, vampires turning to each other with expressions of disbelief. "Your mate?" An older male vampire stepped forward, his power rolling off him in waves. "That's impossible. The mate bond doesn't form between vampire and human." "And yet it has, Constantine." Gideon's voice was absolute authority. "3 nights ago, I felt the bond snap into place. Serafina confirmed it through her visions. Rosalie Vega is my fated mate, and as such, she's under my protection and the protection of every vampire sworn to me." "The law, someone started." "The law will change," Gideon interrupted. "I'm not asking your permission. I'm informing you of reality. The mate bond is sacred, older than our courts and kingdoms. You cannot ask me to reject it any more than you could ask me to stop existing." Lady Morgana's laugh was like breaking glass. "So you would throw away 1,000 years of law, 1,000 years of carefully maintained secrecy for one human girl? Have you gone mad?" Gideon's hand tightened on Rosalie's back, and she felt his rage like a physical force. "Careful, Morgana. I've tolerated your ambitions because you're useful, but my patience has limits." "Then set new limits." Morgana gestured sharply at Rosalie. "Turn her. Make her one of us. Problem solved." "No." Gideon's voice was flat, absolute. "Rosalie will choose her own fate when and if she's ready. I won't force transformation on my mate." Constantine stepped forward, his expression troubled. "My king, I've served you for 3 centuries. You know I'm loyal. But you must understand how this looks to the other kingdoms. If you refuse to enforce the law regarding human knowledge of our kind, if you claim a human mate without turning her immediately, every vampire in North America will question your strength. Your enemies will use this against you." "Let them try." Gideon's eyes flashed red. "I've held these territories through wars, plagues, and the rise and fall of human empires. I'm not about to fall now because I chose to protect my mate." Rosalie had been silent through all of this, letting Gideon handle the politics as he'd advised. But now she spoke up, her voice clear and steady. "May I say something?" Every eye in the chamber turned to her, and the pressure of their attention was almost physical. But Rosalie had spent years in operating rooms where one wrong move meant death. She knew how to function under pressure. "I understand that my existence poses a problem for you," she said, addressing the council. "I'm human. I know your secret, and according to your laws, that means I should die or be turned. But I'm also apparently fated to be your king's mate, which even you acknowledge is sacred. So you have a choice. You can fight against fate itself and risk civil war, or you can adapt." "Adapt?" Morgana's voice dripped with scorn. "You think we should change 1,000-year-old laws because one human got lucky?" "I think you should consider why those laws exist in the first place," Rosalie countered. "You want to stay hidden from humanity to avoid the wars and persecution that would come if humans knew vampires were real." "That's reasonable. But I'm not a threat to your secrecy. I have no interest in exposing you, no desire to start a war. All I want is to understand this bond and figure out where I fit in Gideon's life. Why is that worth killing over?" Because you're a weakness, another vampire hissed. You're mortal, fragile. Our king's enemies will use you against him. Then let me become strong enough to defend myself, Rosalie shot back. Teach me about your world. Train me in whatever ways humans can be trained. Let me prove I'm not a liability before you condemn me. Gideon looked at her with something like wonder in his eyes, and Rosalie felt the mate bond pulse with warmth between them. Constantine studied her thoughtfully. She makes a fair point. The law exists to protect us, not to punish those who pose no real threat. And if the mate bond is genuine, he turned to Gideon, my king, would you consent to having Serafina verify the bond publicly? If the oracle confirms it before the entire council, that would go a long way toward satisfying concerns. I'll do more than that, a new voice said, and Rosalie turned to see an ancient vampire woman entering the chamber. Her skin was like porcelain, her hair pure white, and her eyes were the clouded white of a seer. I've already looked into every possible future stemming from this moment, and I can tell you all with absolute certainty that Rosalie Vega is indeed King Gideon's fated mate. Serafina, Gideon said with obvious relief. Tell them what you told me. The oracle moved to the center of the chamber, and every vampire fell silent. The bond between them is stronger than any I've witnessed in 2 millennia of life. It burns with a light that suggests prophecy, destiny, something beyond mere chance. And more importantly, every timeline where we attempt to separate them or harm the girl ends in disaster, civil war, the collapse of the Eastern kingdoms, chaos that spreads across the entire vampire world. She turned her blind eyes toward Rosalie, somehow seeing despite her lack of sight. She's important, not just to our king, but to all of us. The sooner you accept that, the better our chances of survival. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Constantine bowed his head. Then I support my king's choice. If fate itself has declared them mates, who are we to argue? Other vampires began to murmur agreement, though Rosalie could see that some, like Morgana, remained hostile. But the tide had turned. Serafina's pronouncement had shifted the balance. The law will be amended, Gideon declared. Effective immediately, humans who form genuine mate bonds with vampires will be protected under the same rights as any vampire, regardless of whether they choose to turn. This is not up for debate. I'll present the change to the High Council myself if necessary. You're making a mistake, Morgana said coldly. This will be seen as weakness, and your enemies will exploit it. Then I'll deal with my enemies, Gideon replied. As I always have. Are we done here? Constantine nodded. We're done, my king, though I'd suggest keeping the lady close for the next few weeks while news spreads. There may be vampires who decide to test your resolve. They're welcome to try, Gideon said, and there was death in his voice. This session is adjourned. The vampires began to file out, though many cast curious or hostile glances at Rosalie as they passed. When the chamber was finally empty except for Gideon, Constantine, and Serafina, Rosalie allowed herself to sag slightly. You did well, Serafina said, smiling. Not many humans could stand before the Night Council without showing fear. Oh, I was terrified, Rosalie admitted. I just hid it well. Constantine laughed. Then you'll fit right in. Half of vampire politics is pretending to be braver than you feel. He bowed to Gideon. I'll spread word among the loyal families that Lady Rosalie is under your protection. That should minimize trouble. Thank you, old friend. When they were alone, Gideon pulled Rosalie into his arms and she melted against him, letting herself shake now that the performance was over. You were magnificent, he murmured into her hair. I've never been prouder. I thought I was going to pass out, she confessed. But you didn't. You stood your ground and made them listen. He pulled back to look at her. You're going to be an incredible queen. Queen, Rosalie's eyes widened. I'm not, we haven't even... The mate bond makes you my equal, Gideon said gently. If you choose to stay with me, to accept this bond fully, you'll be queen of the Eastern Kingdoms. I should have explained that earlier. Rosalie's head was spinning. This is all moving so fast. I know, and I'm sorry, but vampire politics doesn't allow for slow courtships. He cupped her face in his cold hands. However, what happens between us privately can move as slowly as you need. I won't rush you into anything you're not ready for." She looked up at him, at this ancient, powerful being who'd thrown his entire world into chaos for her, and felt something shift in her chest. It wasn't just the mate bond anymore, it was genuine affection, respect, the first stirrings of something that might become love. "Take me home," she said softly, "to your penthouse. I want to be alone with you." Gideon's eyes darkened with emotion. "As you wish." They were back at the penthouse within 20 minutes, and Rosalie immediately kicked off the uncomfortable heels and collapsed onto the couch. Gideon disappeared briefly and returned with a glass of wine for her and nothing for himself. "You don't drink?" she asked, taking a grateful sip. "Not wine, just blood." He sat beside her, close but not quite touching. "Does that bother you?" Rosalie considered. "It should, probably, but I'm a doctor. I work with blood every day. It's just biology to me." She paused. "Do you kill when you feed?" "Not anymore. I haven't killed a human for food in over 2 centuries. I use blood banks, donors, occasionally my own wrist if I'm desperate." "Your own wrist?" "Vampire blood is potent enough to sustain us for short periods, though it's not pleasant." He smiled slightly. "One of many things you'll learn about my kind if you stay." "If I stay," Rosalie repeated. "You keep saying that like I have a choice, but the mate bond is powerful, yes, but it doesn't remove your free will. You can fight it if you want to, reject me if you choose. It would hurt us both, might even eventually drive me mad, but it's possible." His gray eyes were serious. "I won't trap you, Rosalie. If you decide this life isn't for you, I'll find a way to let you go." "Would you really?" She searched his face. "Could you?" "I'd have to, because keeping you against your will would destroy everything the mate bond is supposed to be." He reached out and took her hand, and that golden light sparked between them again. "But I'm hoping you'll choose to stay, choose to give us, a real chance." Rosalie set down her wineglass and shifted closer. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Everything I knew about the world changed in one night. My career, my life, everything I'd planned, it's all up in the air now. But I'm also more drawn to you than I've ever been to anyone. And I don't know if that's the bond or if it's real." "It's both," Gideon said. "The mate bond doesn't create feelings from nothing. It recognizes compatibility, amplifies connection that would exist anyway. What you feel for me, what I feel for you, it's real. The bond just helped us find each other faster." She studied him. This beautiful, deadly creature who looked at her like she was the answer to every prayer. Then, making a decision that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure, Rosalie leaned in and kissed him. Gideon froze for a heartbeat, as if shocked by her boldness, then pulled her closer with a desperation that betrayed his iron control. His lips were cool against hers, but not unpleasant, and when he deepened the kiss, Rosalie felt the mate bond flare to life between them like a living thing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard despite Gideon not technically needing air, he rested his forehead against hers. "You're sure about this?" "No," Rosalie said honestly, "but I'm sure I want to find out where this goes. I'm sure I don't want to walk away without trying." "Then we'll try," Gideon promised. "We'll take it one day at a time, figure it out together." Over the next few weeks, that's exactly what they did. Rosalie moved into the penthouse officially, though she kept her apartment as a safety net that she never admitted to needing. She learned about vampire society, about the intricate politics and ancient feuds that shaped their world. Gideon introduced her to the few vampires he truly trusted. Constantine became a protective older brother figure, and Serafina offered cryptic but genuine friendship. Rosalie also continued working at the hospital, though with enhanced security that she pretended not to notice. Gideon had been right about enemies testing his resolve twice in the first month. Vampires attempted to harm her, and twice they were stopped by guards Gideon had stationed throughout the city. The second time, Rosalie had actually been present when a vampire tried to grab her outside the hospital, and she'd watched in shock as Gideon appeared from nowhere and killed the attacker with brutal efficiency. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he'd said afterward, washing blood from his hands. "Don't be." Rosalie had surprised herself with how calm she felt. "He tried to kill me. You protected me. That's not something to apologize for." But the attacks reinforced what they both knew: she was vulnerable in ways that no queen should be. which led to the conversation they'd been avoiding for weeks. "I've been thinking about turning," Rosalie said one night as they sat together, watching the sunset through UV-protected glass. Gideon went very still beside her. "What brought this on?" "Practicality. I'm a liability as a human, and if I'm going to be your queen, I need to be strong enough to stand beside you without constant protection." She turned to face him. "And I want forever with you. The mate bond showed me that, but spending these weeks together confirmed it. I love you, Gideon." It was the first time she'd said the words aloud, and Rosalie watched emotions flicker across his ancient face: joy, love, fear, hope. "I love you too," he said roughly, "more than I thought possible. But turning is permanent, Rosalie. You'd lose your humanity, your ability to go out in sunlight, your connection to the human world. I won't let you make that choice lightly." "I'm not making it lightly. I'm a doctor, I understand what I'd be giving up, but I'd also gain centuries of life, power, the ability to truly be your equal." She took his hand. "I'm not ready yet. I want a few more months to settle things with my family, to finish the cases I'm working on, but I want you to be the one to turn me when the time comes." "You're certain?" His grip tightened on her hand. "Because there are other vampires who could do it, elders with more experience." "I want it to be you," Rosalie interrupted. "You're my mate. This should be between us." Gideon pulled her into his arms, and Rosalie felt him trembling. "Then when you're ready, I'll turn you, and I'll spend the rest of eternity making sure you never regret it." 3 months later, Rosalie stood in the private chambers beneath the museum, surrounded by the vampires who'd become her family. Constantine was there, and Serafina, and several others who'd proven their loyalty. Gideon stood before her in ceremonial robes, looking every inch the ancient king, and Rosalie wore white a bride preparing for a different kind of wedding. "Are you ready?" Gideon asked softly. Rosalie nodded. She'd spent the last few days saying goodbye to her human life. She'd resigned from the hospital, claiming she was moving abroad for research. She'd told her family she was traveling for an extended period. She'd tied up every loose end she could think of. Now, standing on the edge of immortality, Rosalie felt at peace. "I'm ready." Gideon pulled her close, his hand cradling the back of her head, and struck. The pain was instant and overwhelming, fire rushing through her veins as vampire venom mixed with her blood. Rosalie gasped, her hands fisting in Gideon's robes as he drank deep. Just when she thought she might pass out, he pulled back and bit his own wrist, pressing it to her lips. "Drink," he commanded, and Rosalie obeyed. Vampire blood tasted like copper and night and something indefinable that was purely Gideon. She swallowed once, twice, 3 times, and felt the change begin. Her heart stuttered, racing, then slowing, as the venom rewrote her DNA. Her senses sharpened, sounds becoming almost painfully clear. She could hear whispered conversations across the chamber, could smell the individual scents of every vampire present. Then everything went dark. Rosalie woke 3 days later in a silk-lined coffin, and her first thought was that she was ravenously hungry. Her second thought was that she could hear Gideon's breathing in the room above her, could sense his presence like a beacon. She pushed open the coffin lid, it should have been heavy but felt light as paper, and climbed out. She was in a beautiful underground room, and Gideon was sitting in a chair nearby, watching her with anxious eyes. "How do you feel?" he asked. Rosalie took stock. Everything was sharper, brighter, more vivid. She could see in the darkness as clearly as day, could hear mice moving in the walls of the building above them, and the hunger was a living thing in her chest, demanding to be fed. "Hungry?" she said, and was startled by how her voice had changed, richer, more melodic. "And different. Everything is different. That's normal. The transition takes time to adjust to." Gideon stood and offered her a glass of dark red liquid. "Drink this. It will help." The blood was warm and perfect, and Rosalie drained the glass before she'd even realized she'd moved. "More?" "Slowly. You need to learn control before we give you more." Gideon cupped her face, studying her. "Your eyes are red. That will fade to gray or amber in a few weeks as you stabilize, and your fangs are extended. Can you retract them?" Rosalie focused and felt the sharp points slide back into her gums. "Like that? Perfect. You're adapting quickly," he smiled. "Welcome to immortality, my love." The next few weeks were a crash course in vampire existence. Rosalie learned to hunt from blood bags without losing control, learned to move with the supernatural speed and grace of her new kind, learned to navigate the hunger that was always present, but manageable. Gideon was patient, teaching her everything she needed to know, never pushing too hard or too fast. She also discovered new aspects of the mate bond. Now that they were both vampire, the connection was even stronger. She could sense Gideon's emotions, could find him anywhere in the city just by following the pull in her chest. And the physical attraction that had always been present became almost overwhelming, leading to nights when they barely left the bedroom. Is it always like this?" Rosalie asked one morning, tangled in silk sheets with Gideon's cool body wrapped around hers. "This intense? Between mates? Yes, we're designed to be obsessed with each other." He pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "Does it bother you?" "No, I just want to make sure I'm still myself, not just consumed by the bond." "You're still you," Gideon assured her. "The bond enhances what's already there. It doesn't replace your personality. You're still brilliant, stubborn, compassionate. You're just also mine now." Rosalie turned in his arms to face him. "And you're mine. Always," he promised. 2 months after her turning, Gideon called another council session, and this time, Rosalie stood beside him as his equal. Her transformation had been noted throughout the vampire world, and reactions had been mixed. Some saw it as proof that the king had finally come to his senses. Others viewed it as a romantic gesture that softened his reputation. Morgana, predictably, was in the latter camp. "So the human finally decided to join us," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "How convenient." "I decided to accept my place as Gideon's mate and queen," Rosalie corrected calmly. "If that bothers you, I suggest you take it up with fate." Several vampires chuckled, and Rosalie felt Gideon's pride through the bond. "The reason I've called you all here," Gideon announced, "is to formally introduce Queen Rosalie and to ratify the law changes we discussed months ago. As of tonight, humans who form genuine mate bonds with vampires are protected under the same laws that govern our kind. Anyone who harms a bonded human or attempts to interfere with a recognized mate bond will face execution." "And what happens when other vampires start claiming random humans as mates to protect them?" Morgana challenged. "Then those claims will be investigated by Seraphina and the Oracle Council," Gideon replied. "False mate claims can be detected through vision and magic. Real bonds will be protected, false ones punished." Constantine stepped forward. "I've drafted the formal amendments based on King Gideon's requirements. All that remains is the council's vote." The vote was called, and despite some opposition, the majority approved the changes. The law that had stood for 1,000 years was officially rewritten, all because fate had decided to pair a vampire king with a human doctor. After the session, as they walked back to the penthouse through the city, Rosalie said, "Do you think this will actually change things? Make it easier for vampires and humans to coexist?" "I think it's a start," Gideon replied. "The mate bond is rare. Most vampires will never experience it. But knowing it's possible, that the laws allow for it, that might open doors we never imagined." "Good," Rosalie squeezed his hand. "Because I'd like to think we're setting a precedent, not just an exception." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, and Rosalie marveled at how much her life had changed in just a few months. She'd gone from believing vampires were fiction to becoming one, from being alone to finding her soulmate, from following a planned path to embracing the unknown. "Any regrets?" Gideon asked, as if reading her thoughts. Rosalie considered carefully. She missed the sun sometimes, missed the simplicity of her human life. She missed her family, though they'd promised to maintain contact despite the lies she'd had to tell. But when she weighed those losses against what she'd gained centuries with the man she loved, power, purpose, a place in a hidden world, the choice was clear. "No regrets," she said firmly. "This is where I'm meant to be." Gideon pulled her close and kissed her, right there in the middle of the street with humans passing by, oblivious to the two vampires in their midst. "I love you, Rosalie Vega, my mate, my queen, my everything." "I love you too," she whispered against his lips. "Forever." And in the world of vampires, forever meant exactly that. The next year passed in a blur of politics, learning, and deepening love. Rosalie embraced her role as queen, using her medical background to establish better relationships between vampires and the human blood banks they relied on. She worked with Constantine to modernize some of the more archaic council procedures. She even developed a tentative friendship with some of the vampires who'd initially opposed her, proving through actions that she was strong enough to stand beside Gideon. But there were still enemies, still vampires who saw her as a threat or viewed Gideon's changes to the law as unforgivable weakness. The worst of these was Lord Victor, an elder from the European Council who had coveted Gideon's territory for centuries. The attack came on a night when Gideon was meeting with the High Council abroad, leaving Rosalie in Constantine's protection. She was in the penthouse, reviewing documents, when the wards shattered. Rosalie moved instantly, her vampire speed getting her to the weapons cabinet before the first attacker burst through the door. She grabbed a silver blade. Silver could kill vampires if you hit the heart or severed the head and spun to face 3 intruders. "Lord Victor sends his regards," the lead vampire said with a cruel smile. "He wanted you to know this isn't personal, just business." "Killing your queen is business?" Rosalie kept her voice steady despite her racing thoughts. Where was Constantine? Had they killed him? "You're not our queen. You're a mistake. A human who got lucky and convinced a love-struck king to throw away centuries of tradition." The vampire advanced. "But don't worry, this will be quick." They rushed her simultaneously, but Rosalie had been training for months. She dropped low, sweeping the legs out from under the first attacker, then drove her blade into his chest as he fell. The second vampire grabbed her from behind, but she flipped him using leverage and strength she was still getting used to, then stabbed down into his back. The third vampire, the leader, looked at her with new respect. "You're better than expected." "I had a good teacher," Rosalie said, circling, "and I'm not going to die tonight." They fought in a blur of supernatural speed, blades clashing, bodies moving faster than human eyes could track. Rosalie took its vampires were hard to kill, but she gave as good as she got. Finally, she managed to get inside the vampire's guard and drove her blade up into his heart. He gasped, eyes wide with shock, then crumbled to ash. Rosalie stood there, bleeding from several wounds, surrounded by the remains of her attackers, when Constantine burst through the door. He was badly injured, one arm hanging useless at his side, but alive. "My lady, are you—" He stopped, taking in the scene. "You killed them all?" "They didn't give me much choice." Rosalie's hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "Are you all right?" "I've survived worse. But we need to call the king. Victor has declared open war." The war lasted 6 months and cost hundreds of vampire lives. Gideon returned immediately when he heard about the attack, and his rage was a terrible thing to behold. He called in every favor, every alliance, every loyalty he'd built over centuries. The eastern kingdoms rallied behind their king and queen, and slowly, territory by territory, they pushed back Victor's forces. Rosalie fought beside Gideon throughout, proving herself a capable warrior and tactician. The vampires who'd doubted her strength learned to respect her, and those who'd thought her a weakness discovered she was anything but. The final battle took place in an old cathedral in Philadelphia, where Victor had established his base. Gideon faced him alone. This was a challenge that required a king's response, while Rosalie and Constantine handled Victor's remaining forces. "You should have stayed in Europe," Gideon said coldly, circling his enemy. "You should have accepted the law changes and moved on." Victor laughed bitterly. "Accept that you rewrote our most sacred laws for a human? Never. You've made us weak, Gideon. You've made us vulnerable." "No, I made us capable of change, capable of growth. You're the one who's weak, Victor, so afraid of anything new that you'd rather destroy than adapt." They fought with centuries of skill and power, 2 ancient vampires at the height of their abilities. But Gideon had something Victor didn't, something to fight for beyond pride and territory. He had Rosalie, had the mate bond, had a future worth protecting. In the end, it was that difference that decided the battle. Gideon's blade found Victor's heart, and the old vampire fell to ash with a final bitter curse. The war was over. In the aftermath, as they stood in the ruins of the cathedral surrounded by their allies, Rosalie pulled Gideon close. "Is it finished?" she asked. "It's finished," he confirmed, Victor's supporters have surrendered, and the High Council has ratified our law changes across all territories. There may still be individual vampires who oppose us, but organized resistance is done. Good. Rosalie was exhausted in a way she'd never experienced, even as a doctor pulling double shifts. Can we go home now? Yes, my love. Let's go home. They returned to the penthouse, to the city they'd defended, to the life they'd fought so hard to protect. And as they stood together, watching the sunrise through UV-protected glass, Rosalie, mourning the natural sunlight she'd lost, but finding beauty in this filtered version, Gideon wrapped his arms around her from behind. Do you remember what you said that first night, he asked? That you wanted to be my partner, not my possession? I remember. You've been so much more than that. You've been my strength, my conscience, my reason for fighting. I wouldn't have survived this war without you, wouldn't have had the courage to stand against Victor and the old ways. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Thank you for choosing this life, choosing me. Rosalie turned in his arms to face him. Thank you for giving me the choice, for rewriting 1,000 years of law so we could have this. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. His gray eyes were soft with emotion. I love you, Rosalie, my mate, my queen, my forever. I love you too, she whispered, then kissed him as the sun rose on their new world. The years that followed were peaceful by vampire standards. Rosalie established herself as a queen who balanced strength with compassion, who modernized their laws while respecting tradition. She and Gideon ruled the Eastern Kingdoms together, true partners in every sense. They faced challenges, dealt with politics, handled threats both internal and external. But through it all, they had each other. The mate bond that had brought them together remained strong, a constant source of love and connection. They learned and grew together, exploring immortality hand in hand. 5 years after the war with Victor, Rosalie stood in the council chamber, no longer the terrified human, facing down ancient predators, but a respected queen addressing her subjects. She was presenting a proposal to establish formal diplomatic relationships with certain human organizations, carefully selected groups who could handle the truth about vampires. This is the natural progression of the changes we started, she argued. We can't hide forever. Eventually, humanity will discover us. Better to control that revelation, to establish trust and cooperation before we're forced to. Some vampires opposed the idea, of course. Change always met resistance. But the majority, especially the younger generation, supported the plan. They'd seen what Rosalie and Gideon's partnership had accomplished, had witnessed the strength in adaptation rather than stagnation. When the vote passed, Rosalie felt Gideon's pride and love through the bond. He was in Europe for the month, handling politics with the High Council, but they remained connected across the distance. Well done, my love, his mental voice whispered, another gift of the mate bond. You're changing our world. We're changing it, she corrected. Together. Always together, he agreed. I'll be home in 3 days. I'll be waiting. And she would be. Because despite everything they'd faced, everything they'd overcome, the core of their story remained unchanged. They were mates, partners, lovers. They'd defied laws and tradition to be together, had fought wars and faced death, had rewritten the rules that governed their kind. All because fate had decided that a vampire king and a human doctor belonged together. Rosalie thought back to that night in the hospital when she'd first seen Gideon across the corridor and felt the world shift. She'd been terrified, overwhelmed, thrust into a situation she couldn't possibly have prepared for. But she'd faced it with courage, with strength, with the determination to forge her own path. And now, years later, she stood as queen of the vampire world, respected and loved, powerful and purposeful. She'd lost her humanity but gained so much more: a family, a purpose, a love that would last forever. As Rosalie left the council chamber and stepped out into the night that was now her domain, she smiled. The city lights sparkled below, full of humans who had no idea what walked among them. Above, stars shone in the clear sky, eternal witnesses to the immortal world. Somewhere across the ocean, Gideon was handling politics with the same careful balance of strength and diplomacy he'd shown for centuries. In 3 days, he'd return home, and they'd fall into each other's arms the way they always did after time apart. They'd share blood and stories and love, would plan their next moves, would continue building the future they'd fought for. And in 1,000 years, when the laws they'd rewritten had become ancient tradition in their own right, when the war with Victor was a distant memory, when everything had changed yet again, they would still be together. Still mates, still partners, still deeply, impossibly in love. Because some bonds were stronger than death, older than law, more powerful than tradition. The mate bond was eternal, and Rosalie and Gideon would have forever to prove it. She pulled out her phone and sent a simple message. "I love you." His response came immediately. "I love you too, always and forever, always and forever." In the vampire world, those words were a vow, a promise, an absolute truth. And Rosalie Salvatore, once human, now immortal, formerly a surgeon, currently a queen, smiled as she headed home to the penthouse she shared with the vampire king who'd rewritten 1,000 years of law for her. Their story had started with an impossible bond and a choice that defied everything their world believed. It had continued through danger and war, through change and growth, through love that transcended the boundary between human and vampire. And it would never end, because they had something rare and precious and worth fighting for. They had each other, and they had forever.